Good afternoon, and welcome to this 20-minute session. Man, there's a lot of noise in here. That's great. So we have 20 minutes where I'm going to show you a little bit about being more productive with Visual Studio extensions. My name is Mads Christensen, and I'm program manager on the Visual Studio extensibility team. And a lot of what Visual Studio can do, we can actually extend upon to, do exactly, make Visual Studio do exactly what we need it to do to increase our productivity. And we only have 20 minutes, so there's limits to what I can show you, but Visual Studio is a full platform that we can bend to our will and do some very, very cool things. So what I want to spend the time on here with you today is to give you a little sneak peek into what is an extension, how do they work, how do we create one really easily, because we all probably have been in a situation where we think, we're sitting there writing code in Visual Studio and we think, it would be cool if Visual Studio would do this or that for me right now. Right? So this is about going from that idea of it would be cool if to actually implement it and add a new feature to Visual Studio. This wouldn't be a Visual Studio extensibility talk if I didn't use any extensions. So here's a list of extensions. This is a URL, and you will go to like a GitHub gist where I have these links, so you can take a photo of that URL if you want. And I'm going to go through some of these extensions I'm going to use, because of course there are extensions for extension authoring. Okay? It's very meta, but it's very cool. And some of these are very new and a little bit experimental, but we'll get to it. All right. So before we go to the demo, what do we want to build? We're all different, right? We all have different things that we do every single day, and it would be nice if we can automate some of the things we do all the time. And for me, as an extension author, I change GUIDs all the time. So what's more natural for me than to write something that will insert a new GUID, create a new GUID and insert into my C# code or XML files or whatnot. So that's what I want to do today. So I'm going to load up Visual Studio, and I'm going to create a new project. Now, I have installed the Visual Studio extensibility workload. So when you install Visual Studio, you can say, I want Windows development and ASP.NET development and so on. At the very bottom, it says extensibility. So I have installed that, and that allows me to create a new project under extensibility called the V6 project. So let's just create one of those. V6, oh, that's great. So the first thing we're going to see here when we create the project is a little dialog box. So this is from one of the extensions that I just showed you on the list. There's an extension that says, hey, do you want to install a Roslyn analyzer that's going to help you write extensions? So yes, I do want that. So I'm just going to click OK. So now it's going to install a NuGet package that's going to help me with my extension authoring. Now that's done. I get this nice overview page. I can learn some more. Just going to close that down and get rid of the HTML file. That was that overview page I'm just shutting down here. And this is what I get. Basically, a NuGet package file, the packages config, and then a V6 manifest file. And this is where I provide metadata for my extension. It already filled in some stuff, such as the name. Not really a good name here, but I can fill in description, who's the author, what is the version number, and so on. And so if we build this project, I'm going to look in my bin directory here to see what is in here. There is a V6 file, .v6. And it's actually just a zip file. This is the extension. And here's what's inside of it. Here's that V6 manifest file with that metadata. And then we have some other files that the compiler generated for me. We don't really care about those files. That's for the installer to read from and so on. But this is an extension. This is a V6 file. And this is the one I want to upload to the marketplace to share with everyone or email to my friends and colleagues and whatnot. But obviously right now it doesn't do anything. There's not a single C# file in here. There's no code at all. So I'm just going to add a new item. And I can go under extensibility and say custom command. So in Visual Studio, a button, whether it exists in a context menu or toolbar or whatever it is, it's called a command. And I want a custom command called insert GUID. And now Visual Studio is going to do something really cool. It's going to install a bunch of NuGet packages, and it's going to create a lot of new files for me. Because every command has to be registered, has to be set up in the right way so Visual Studio knows what to do with it. And there are certain files that are involved. And we can see we actually got quite a bit of new files in Solution Explorer right here. So we got a resx file. We got a key file here for strong name signing. But we're going to look at these three files. We got a VSCT file. That's a XML file. And then 2 C# files. Let's take a look in the XML file. And I have an extension here that removes all comments in a file. So it's called comment remover. But here's basically what we look at. Let me start by just telling you about the button. The way we describe our UI in Visual Studio is through this XML file. So in here, I can create as many buttons as I want. I have a button here where the text say, or should say, insert GUID, like this. It has an icon. You know how some buttons in Visual Studio have icons? This one has an icon. And it's described by GUID images, which is mapped right here, which points to a PNG file that was also laid down here. Now this PNG file contains 6 16 by 16 icons. Right, so we can have multiple icons in here, and this one points to one of them. And then we set up the hierarchy, because where should we put the button? Well, all buttons in Visual Studio, they live in a group. And the group I defined up here. Notice how the button says that the parent should be a, basically, if you look at these two, GUID and ID, is defined right here. So the button is parented to the group up here. And the group is also parented onto a menu. Okay, so we have buttons at the bottom, then we have groups, and then we have menus. And you can actually have multiple. So on top of that, you can have groups and menus and groups and menus. But a button is always inside a group. And this little piece of text right here tells me where this group should be. And it should be in the Tools menu right here. Oh, Tools. So here we have an example of 2 buttons in one group. These 2 first ones. And then we have another group with 2 buttons in it. And we can see the different groups because they're separated by the lines. So that's actually very nice and handy. We can very visually see the different groups. So I'm going to say that I'm going to create a group and put a button in it and put it into this menu. So somewhere here, our button is going to show up in its own group. So I'm going to run without attaching the debugger. And that's making Visual Studio compile my project into the v6 and deploy it to what's called the experimental instance. The experimental instance is a full copy of Visual Studio, the exact same Visual Studio that I was coding in before, but with its own registry hive. So any settings that I have are not carried over to the experimental instance. It's sort of a clean slate. So now we're running. And if we look at the menu here, we can see that I indeed have a button with an icon, and it says Insert GUID. Okay? So that was the VSCT file. The next interesting thing was the package file. And a package file is sort of the glue of a Visual Studio extension. It's sort of the base of a lot of operations. And a package file is registered with Visual Studio to automatically initialize when a button is clicked, when my button is clicked right here. So it has one thing that we need to override, which is called initialize async. And in here, we call initialize async on our insert GUID command, which we haven't looked at yet. So whenever I click the button, this class is going to run. It's going to run this line of code that initializes my actual command. And if we look at that, we can see that it does exactly, it registers the command. So we see the command is right here. This is a little bit technical, but basically what it means is that I register a command, and I call a function here called execute whenever the button is clicked. Now this command has a GUID, and it has an ID. And if we look at this GUID, we can see that it is exactly the GUID that is defined in my XML file. Okay? And inside my GUID symbol here, I have my ID, which has the value of 100. Right here, and it shows a message box. So let's just try that. I'm going to execute this, and lo and behold, we get a message box. Not very interesting, but at least we have sort of the end-to-end working, and now we can start to customize these features. So I'm just going to delete this whole message box thing right here. So how do we insert a GUID? Well, there are many ways you can do that. Visual Studio is very big and broad and has a lot of APIs for doing a bunch of things. And so there's actually many ways I can go about this. But when you think about the simplest thing you can do, wouldn't that be to copy a GUID into the clipboard and paste it into the editor? Sounds reasonable to me. So, but I want to be nice about it. I don't want to just copy a GUID and then paste it, and then I've just basically erased whatever was on your clipboard already. So I want to copy what was in your clipboard, then do my little GUID thing and paste it, and then restore your clipboard as it was. So we can do that very simply. Let's do this here. So we need Windows Forms here. So get data objects, and then we're going to do our magic here, and then afterwards we're going to restore the data and put the clipboard back to the state it was in originally. So I'm going to set text to a new GUID and put that into the clipboard. And now I'm going to paste it. How do we paste things? Well, one thing that comes to mind is I could do, you know, the oldest trick in the book. Send keys. So basically, simulate that the user clicks Control V, which looks like this. Let me zoom in here so everyone can see. This is one way we can do it, except I have to be very sure about the context I'm in when I do this. I have to make sure that the editor has focus, and you know, when but you know, editor doesn't really have focus when I open a menu and click a button, right? So this is not a sort of a bulletproof way. What would be better is if I can just call an existing Visual Studio command for pasting. Okay? Because then I don't have to kind of think about all the edge cases of pasting something. There's already a command for that. So how do I figure out the name of the command for pasting? Because I need the name. So that, let's see here. So let's find out, what is the command? I'm going to go up to the quick launch up here and search for keyboard. And in here, I have all the Visual Studio commands that I can use, and I'm just going to search for paste. And there's one here called edit.paste. And if I look here, it actually has Control V as the global keyboard shortcut. So that's probably it. Right? I'm pretty confident this is the command I'm looking for. So edit.paste. We remember that. So now I just need to figure out how do I execute a command that already exists. Now there's a way we can do that very, very easily. And we're going to use something called the DTE, which is an automation object that makes a lot of extension work kind of easier. So I'm going to get that service. Visual Studio is full of services. And for me to consume a service, I can do something like this. So I'm going to get the type of service, which in this case is DTE, and then cast it as a DTE object. There we go. And now I can simply say DTE.execute command. And it takes a string. And that's the name of that command. So edit.paste. So this is kind of simple. I just copy a GUID, and I call the paste command. Okay? So let's see it in action. I'm going to open a C# file that I prepped for this purpose. Okay, I'm going to put a GUID right in here. So go to Tools, Insert GUID, and boom. Okay? So now I have a working extension. And you know, in my use case, I actually want to change GUID, so I want to be able to make a selection and say Insert GUID, and this should just change it because I just paste a new GUID on top of it. So this is actually pretty much exactly what I want. Except, you know, it might be fine for my own purposes. You know, I might be happy with this and call it a day. But you know, I think actually this has potential. I think other people will really like this. So I might want to put it out on the marketplace. But before I do that, I want to just touch it up, make it look a little prettier. And so there are a few things I want to do. First of all, I don't think it should live up in the Tools menu. I think it should be a context menu. You right-click and say Insert GUID. I also don't like the icon. And I think that there should be a keyboard shortcut. So let's do those things. So go back to the XML file. Let's start by adding a new icon. So Visual Studio ships with almost 4,000 icons that we can freely use, and they're all high DPI. They're actually vector graphics, so they will scale to any DPI, and so therefore they're like, it's really nice if we use those if we can, because then we don't have to worry about DPI and screen resolutions or anything like that. So I can import all those into my project. I can do that here on top. Say include, and I'm going to include what's called known image IDs. And then in my button here, I can say image catalog GUID. So now I just need to figure out what is the name of the image that I want. Well, how do we know of all these 4,000 images, what can I use, which was the best suited for this? So there's an extension called Known Monikers Explorer, and it lists all the icons available in Visual Studio. And this is a very, very, very long list. Okay? So I'm just going to search for something that I think might be representative here. So paste. And I can see here I get like 4 results for paste. I kind of like this one. Let's just double click it to see it bigger. So, yeah, this is actually pretty good. So I'm just going to right click and say copy to clipboard. And then come into Visual Studio here. We got a little hang. So this is one of the experimental extensions that I was mentioning. Oh, Visual Studio. We were doing so well. All right. I think we're doing pretty well here. We can save it. We can save it. There we go. Go into the VSCT file. We didn't save this one. So let's just include it again. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. And we call it paste replace. So we do actually get intelligence for this as well through one of the extensions here. So paste replace. And then I just need to make Visual Studio aware that the icon I'm using is actually not a file. It is, in fact, a moniker. So I'm just going to say icon is moniker, like that. So that's kind of nice. And let's move it to a different location, the context menu. So let's see, is the other one awake? No, it's not awake yet. So this one is a brand new extension that's going to make this a lot easier. How do we figure out the names of all and IDs of all these places you can put commands and groups? That's really, really difficult. And so we have an extension here that gives us a list of all the commands that are available in Visual Studio. In this very, very long list, there's almost 4,000 commands. And it will help us to figure out where they live. Okay? So I can put this into inspect mode right here. And it's going to say you can now hold Control-Shift down while you execute any command to figure out information about that command. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So let's Control-Shift and click. And we can see we now have selected the command that I clicked on here, which was quick action for position. And we can see what group it belongs to. That group is then placed on a menu, and it's the menu that I want, that I'm looking for. And it has that name. Okay? So that's pretty cool. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to grab that name and replace it up here. So now my group should be located on the context menu instead of the tools options menu. Oh, and I can delete all my bitmaps here because we're no longer using my image file. Like that. And lastly, we're going to do key bindings. Whoop. So I'm going to hook up my command, insert GUID, like this. And in order to figure out what keyboard shortcuts are available, I can go into Tools, Options, Keyboard again, and figure out what keyboard shortcut I want, what is available, and then use that. So we're kind of running out of time. So I'm just going to tell you that Control-K0 is a perfect combination for this. And so I'm going to say K, and then Control. We get intelligence for that, of course. And then 0, and then Control again here as the modifier key. So now I've changed the location, I've changed the image, and I've given it a keyboard shortcut. So now I'm running the extension again, which is going to automatically deploy it to the experimental instance. The experimental instance of Visual Studio is now starting up. And here we go. By the way, you can see if it's the experimental instance because at the very top it says so right there. And now we look at our file. We can right-click, and lo and behold, we now have insert GUID, and you can see the key binding is registered, Control-K, Control-0. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly how we're going to build insert GUID. If you go to this location right here, you will see a link to this very extension. It's a little bit, there's a little bit of extra features on there to maybe inspire you to see what else is available and possible. So please go visit this. And just remember, it would be cool if, and then go and add productivity tools to Visual Studio. Thank you very much.